Tom Pelissero is back here on the Rich Eisen Show from the NFL Media Group. Good to see you, Tom.
Good to see you guys, though. What's up to my boys in studio who apparently are not watching NFL Network during the day?
Hey. No,
great
no,
to
not
hear
on
as much as I love you.
That
You don't care about anything other than these 15 minutes I give you every week.
No, it's all right. It's all right. It's all right, Tom. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't feed the animals, Tom.
Aggressive.
Don't pay any attention. So, what does a second interview with Bill Belichick look like, Tom? What is happening in Atlanta?
I think that anything revolving around Bill Belichick cannot be categorized as an interview. Let's start there, Rich. This is our meetings. The first meeting was lengthy. It was one-on-one between Bill Belichick and Arthur Blank. My understanding is they've continued to talk on a regular basis about potentially being, moving forward together. And so today, Bill Belichick is in the Atlanta area. He's meeting with a lot of other people within the organization. And it all comes down to, Rich, something that we've talked about for weeks, both related to what was going on in New England at the end and what would have to happen for Bill to take another job, which is it's the structure of the organization. It's what do various people do, what are their roles, what does he control, what does he contractually control, what is he going to be in charge of, can he bring these people to do this? It's all those various things because, you go all the way back from, when Bill Belichick was previously the Cleveland head coach and obviously was with your Jets and then ends up resigning to go to New England here. He's always had a situation where there's not been a general manager, where he's had vast control over different personnel within the organization in addition to the roster. And so from everything that I understand, Rich, Arthur Blank and Bill Belichick have had really positive discussions. A lot of the stuff from a macro perspective, they're on the same page, but you've still got a lot of other people in the building. You've still got a lot of other conversations that need to take place here. And they need to nail those things down. In addition to, obviously, there's various rules that you have to follow before making a head coaching hire. Right now, I'd say everything is certainly trending in the right direction for Bill Belichick to be the Falcons' next head coach, but they're not there yet, and the meetings that are going on today are a big part of it.
Okay, so then what are the Chargers up to? I mean, they spoke to Mike Vrabel after speaking to Jim Harbaugh this week. I was thrilled to see David Shaw on their radar screen. I'm obviously biased when it comes to him. So what's their thinking right now?
Big piece of what the Chargers have been looking for, and John Spanos said this, Rich, on the record shortly after they dismissed Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco, was that experience would be a plus in this job. You go through all their recent hires. A lot of times they've hired one of the hotter candidates. Brandon Staley was a really hot candidate. And if he had not taken the Chargers job on, I believe it was a Sunday night, he would have been on a plane the next day to Philadelphia and quite possibly been the head coach there instead of Nick Sirianni, who ended up getting the job, went to a Super Bowl, and now is subject to discussions about his future as well. At any rate, they've hired that guy in the past. This time around, they want somebody who's done it before. And so their interview list from Jim Harbaugh to Mike Vrabel to Leslie Frazier to David Shaw. They're going to have Dan Quinn for a virtual interview soon as well. A lot of the interviews that they're interviewing different people as well, but a lot of those check the box of somebody who has showed that they can win in the past. Now, Jim Harbaugh is in a little different category relative to a lot of these other coaches because Bill Belichick became available after 4-13. Mike Vrabel became available after losing 18 of his last 24 games. Pete Carroll at this point is available, even though they had a winning record again this season, but because they had not achieved to the level they felt that they should with the roster in recent years. The guy who's kept winning wherever he's been is Jim Harbaugh. And so everything there, too, from my understanding, has been very positive between the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh. The Spanos family knows him going back to his playing days. So there's not a lot of surprises. I know other people kind of are sometimes taken aback just by how unique Jim Harbaugh's personality is. He is a very strong presence in every building. But from everything that I know at this point, nothing's off the table in terms of Jim Harbaugh potentially becoming the head coach of the Chargers. There's also still negotiations going on at Michigan. At some point, Jim Harbaugh is going to have to make a final decision. We've been here, Rich. You certainly have lived through this for several years now. And it'll be interesting to see when it comes right down to it. This is not like a linear, like most of these head coaching searches in the NFL, which is, okay, this is our guy. We're going to start working on a contract with him. We're going to tell the other people we're out. We've identified we're zeroing in. With Harbaugh, you can do that, but he still might go, actually, I'm going to go back to Michigan that's part of the dynamics here that are at play. The one thing I can tell you for sure, Rich, is they committed from the start to doing interviews with everybody that they had slips out for. I believe there's 3 more of those head coaches that they still need to do. They will handle those over the next couple of days here, and then we'll see where we're at. But Jim Harbaugh certainly is in play.
Well, I mean, in terms of Harbaugh, in past years, I've been sitting on pins and needles. This time around, the cushion is a lot more comfortable, Tom, on this whole situation from my perspective. But when do these decisions get made? So what is the timeline here, right? I mean, because and the league wanted this process drawn out more, and check that box. Mission accomplished there. Because Seattle hasn't just started interviewing people essentially this week, and then you keep mentioning that there are slips out for candidates. I mean, I know about the Rooney Rule, but everything else is still a bit murky for a lot of fans. What's the timing on all this?
We'll start with the Rooney Rule. The Chargers have fulfilled their obligations under the Rooney Rule. They're allowed now to make a hire. The Raiders have fulfilled their obligations. They can make a hire. The Falcons have not yet conducted an external interview with a minority candidate. You have to do 2 of those in person prior to making a hire. And then you referenced that pushing it back. January 22nd was the date that the league had established as the first time the current NFL assistants can do head coaching interviews. I would tell you, Rich, my personal concern, not speaking for the league, because obviously they put these policies in place for a reason. My personal concern, as soon as they pushed it back by another week, is the reality that if you understand how these things work and you understand how billionaire owners are geared, nobody was just going to sit there for 2 weeks, or in the case of, for instance, the Chargers or the Raiders or the Panthers who had made changes in the season, they're not going to sit on their hands until January 22nd and then go, okay, now let's run a real search. We've already got a pretty good idea in a lot of these places what direction this might head. There's a lot of back channeling that's involved in these things. Teams can be as ready as they want to be. Take the Washington Commanders GM search, in which they did 2 rounds of interviews in, I believe, a 3 or 4 day span, and then hired the guy, Adam Peters, that everybody in the league thought they were going to hire 2 months ago. You can approach this in different types of ways here. What you don't want to see is coaches, qualified men of color, having to go in already knowing that this may not be a real interview and that it's probably going to go a different direction. No matter what dates you set, no matter what policies you put in place, if you have mandates, you're setting yourself up where at times there are people who are going through the interview paces without necessarily having a true shot at the job. And that's not ideal. If the rules were different right now, you'd have, for instance, Raheem Morris, who's out of the playoffs, could be doing in-person interviews right now. Because of this mandate with January 22nd, he can't do those even though he's out of the playoffs until next week. They're going to continue to evaluate these policies. We'll see exactly how it plays out. I think it's fair to say from a league perspective, and listen, these owners can do whatever they want in the end, Rich. From a league perspective, the NFL would very much like teams to not finalize their hires until at least early next week and give some of these coaches an opportunity to interview in person, even though there's a lot of signs in certain places that maybe we're already headed a different direction.
So what are the Raiders? You mentioned the Raiders could go ahead and hire someone right now. What I mean, Max Crosby already came out and said, if it's no Antonio Pierce, we're going to have to start talking about maybe trading me. So what do you have for me about the Super Bowl hosts?
I would be extremely surprised, Rich, if Antonio Pierce is not the head coach, and if he is not the head coach prior to us all getting out there in a couple of weeks for Super Bowl week. Having said that, this is a really unique situation with Antonio Pierce, the rare interim coach who gave himself a chance to get the job, but also a guy who didn't have a ton of coaching experience. Yes, he'd been at Arizona State for several years and had a variety of different titles, not all of which were coaching, but he was a linebackers coach for a year and a half who now suddenly has given himself that opportunity to get the job. What you want to make sure, both from the Raiders' perspective and from Antonio Pierce's perspective, is that you're now giving him the best opportunity to succeed and enough resources and help to make that a success. So whether that involves the general manager hire, whether that involves who has personnel control within the organization, these are all part of the broader picture at a time that, remember, The Titans did an interview with Antonio Pierce. If the Raiders don't hire him in the coming days, they could bring him in for an in-person interview. The Falcons also have an interview request out. If the Raiders don't get it done in the coming days, the Falcons could bring him in for an in-person interview. Again, I would be very surprised if Antonio Pierce doesn't ultimately end up being the Raiders head coach. But it's not as simple as, hey, we did 2 other interviews with Leslie Frazier and Chris Richard. We're ready to go. You're now the head coach. All signs are pointing in that direction, Rich, but there's some other things around him that need to be settled before they actually make that official and he signs on to be the Raiders head coach.
Tom Pelissero in his usual Friday spot here on the Rich Eisen Show, my colleague from the NFL Media Group, here on a very busy day prior to the divisional playoff weekend. What's your reporting on Jerry Jones's thought process to retain Mike McCarthy, Tom?
I know that there was this idea, Rich, floating around that Jerry Jones would judge Mike McCarthy off the last game and how the season finished. Everything that I was told throughout the season, the end of the season, the day after the season, 2 days after the season, was that Jerry Jones was going to look at this through the big picture lens, and that he did not have a desire to make a head coaching change. Now, those feelings were crafted as they were going 12-5 and had the number 1 offense in the league with Mike McCarthy in terms of scoring, calling the plays, and they had Dak Prescott playing at an all-time high, and Jerry's sitting there thinking, this is a Super Bowl team. You heard Jerry say it during his relatively brief for Jerry. It was like 10 minutes media session after that game saying, I haven't thought for 1 second about making a change. From everything I was told, that was true. Jerry's mind was just going to, we're going to move on and we're going to keep this thing going. So when they lose and also lose in that fashion, Rich, it certainly was enough to give pause and to think through exactly what was the best thing to do. But you saw that statement from Jerry Jones talking about, Mike's got the highest regular season winning percentage in NFL history. He's had postseason success going back to his Green Bay days. And that final game was not solely on Mike McCarthy. I mean, a Cowboys defense that had been really good the entire season has the Packers jam the ball down their throats running the football on the opening drive. Then they had a bunch of coverage busts. Luke Musgrave is running on one half of the field without a Cowboys defender on it. It's not like Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn are scheming up plays to turn loose a tight end to score by 20 yards. So there's a lot of people who had hands in the way that it ends here. And when you're going back to, okay, what constitutes an upgrade that would make Jerry Jones want to make a change? It's a lot harder than what people think. Mike McCarthy's resume, in terms of his win-loss record, his playoff appearances, everything else over the years, is on par with a lot of the top coaches in the game and is way better than the people who want to simply go, okay, at the playoff moments, whether it was the final seconds last year or it was a blowout loss this year, you can't reduce it entirely to that. Okay, you want to go get Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick went 4-13 last year with the Patriots. He may be the greatest coach of all time. He can go anywhere, and I think that he's going to have a good chance of success. He went 4-13. If you're the Cowboys and you ditch Mike McCarthy off 3 straight 12-win seasons and hire Belichick, and he goes 10-7 while trying to flip a culture that every player has said is really positive, and all the resources that Mike McCarthy's given him, the way that he takes care of players and everything, 10-7 is going to get Bill Belichick run out of town by the fans and the media next year in Dallas. Mike Vrabel, same thing. You're talking about a complete flip of the way that Mike McCarthy has done things,
right,
the way that Vrabel would want to do things. Jerry's looking at this and saying, we've won at a really high level. We have not performed our best at the end. But if we start over, if we go to a completely different culture, it's not just, okay, Bill Belichick gives you that little extra and comes over the top. Rich, you've covered Bill throughout his entire career. I've covered the Patriots for a long time. That's not the way the Bill's brain works. I'm just going to, I'm going to bring in it. Me and Josh Daniels are going to go down there. We're going to win the Super Bowl. There's deeper things here. And so Jerry believes going into the last year of the contract, the best thing to do to give him the opportunity to win with this roster, this team, is Mike McCarthy to stay in place.
Your last line was my follow-up. So if he's so great, right, and the culture's so great, and, changing it is such a radical decision, so why not extend him, right? Or you know what I'm saying? Like, so you're gonna let him go into a season after an off season that ended, it started like this, causing everybody to say, well, you're going to definitely fire him. And he's like, nope, because he's a great play caller and a great resume for regular season. And he has won in the past, in the last 15 years. So why not extend him? He's not gonna, is he? Right?
Jerry hasn't said that expressly, that he's not going to extend him, so we'll see how the coming months go. But he also let Jason Garrett coach the last year of his contract multiple times.
How'd that work?
In Dallas. That's how Jerry. Well, the first time
I saw him on NBC this weekend. I hear you.
I mean, it's not an ideal environment. But here's the thing: in a lot of places, right? If you're coaching out the last year of your contract. For instance, in Pittsburgh, where if they don't do an extension with Mike Tomlin, which my anticipation is the Steelers will try to do an extension with Mike Tomlin, but in a place like that, all of a sudden you'd have this ratcheted up pressure of, why is he coaching in the last year of his deal? In Dallas, everybody's been trying to fire Mike McCarthy for 5 years. His entire time there, people every year are going, every loss, it's why isn't he fired? Every playoff loss, it's why isn't he fired? I don't know that the pressure goes up a whole lot on Mike McCarthy. I don't think that having him in a contract here is any more counterproductive than Jerry Jones doing a press conference 3 days a week, basically, in terms of radio interviews and the postgame. Can you imagine Bill Belichick in that setting? Jerry just was outside and saying he's not, he wants to evaluate everything after this game in terms of your job, your thoughts. Can you imagine how Belichick would deal with that? You got to be a special person to deal with Jerry. Mike McCarthy is a very special person. He's a really good head coach. Compare his record to John Harbaugh or Tomlin or Sean Payton or all these coaches that we put on a pedestal, and they're all really, really good. Mike is right there as well. Number one scoring offense in the league with Dak. If you fire Mike McCarthy, you're also firing your offensive coordinator, your offensive play caller. Obviously, Brian Schottenheimer helps him, but you are making multiple drastic changes right now. And there's a randomness, Rich. Nobody wants to ever hear this, but there is a randomness in the playoffs. This is not the NBA. How many times in an NBA Finals series do you see a team and in game 2, they get blown out by 30 points? You're like, boy, that was awful. Then game 3, they come back and they play really well again. You don't have that luxury in the NFL. I remember a player years ago, I asked him, and the team had just gotten blown out, a veteran player who was really smart about thinking about this. I'm just like, what happened in that game? And I'm going to edit it slightly here for TV and radio purposes here, Rich. He just goes, man, every now and then you have a game that just goes completely to hell immediately, and there's nothing you can do about it. I'm like, that's a pretty good answer. And that's what it felt like with them facing the Packers. That opening drive right down the field, Dak throws an interception, then the pick 6, and already it's 27-0. You're just like, this is over. They were in that game. It was 27-10. They needed a stop. They never got it. But sometimes you have those absolutely abysmal performances. Is that because Mike McCarthy didn't have the players ready to go? If you need a coach to get the players ready to go in a playoff game, like, what are you doing with the players at that point? It's a difficult thing. Everybody's disappointed. Everybody's frustrated. But I'm not surprised, knowing how Jerry thinks about this, knowing the job that Mike McCarthy's done over the last 4 years, that they're going to give him one more shot here. Maybe they make a run, or maybe they don't, and then everybody gets what they've wanted since the day Mike McCarthy took the job, and he's ended up someplace else in 2025.
Well, Tom, I appreciate the time. It's so busy, and you're awesome, not only with your information, your delivery, and I've noticed you looking down. I'm sure your phone is going crazy. Anything from...
Well, I was actually... So we were talking about the weather in Baltimore, because I'm doing that game tomorrow, yeah. So I've been texting with the coaches. My sources say right now, I just got a text from one of the coaches saying, I think it said heavy gust at times of wind. So they are preparing for heavy gusts on the weather reports that the teams are getting right now. It's going to be in the 20s. It could be worse. But, for C.J. Stroud, his first road playoff game, if it's windy out there, it's going to make this all the more interesting. And I'll be out there shivering for you on game day morning tomorrow, assuming that my plane gets in tonight. So
well done. And here I thought you were getting texts from Philadelphia.
There's a lot of text going on, but if it were Philadelphia, as important as you are, Rich, I might have to take that call.
No. I hear you, because that's the same thing. It's just like, I'm sure you saw Fletcher Cox was called a reporter. You're a clown for bringing up the fact that he's on a hot seat. Is Jeffrey Lurie thinking that? Before I let you go, I mean, what's your best guess as to what's happening in Philadelphia? Tom?
I would just say this, Rich, when you have a historic type of a collapse, and this was, I believe the Eagles are the second team in the Super Bowl era to start 10-1 and not win their division. They lost 6 of their last 7 games. They looked non-competitive at times. They looked old and slow on defense. They changed play callers on defense. They obviously had a play caller change on offense. before. The quarterback didn't look right, whether that was, a series of nagging injuries versus just, a regression versus the scheme, whatever. A lot of things did not go well down the stretch. And so Jeffrey Lurie, we've seen these things happen in the past where whether it is coaching staff changes or whether it's making a change at the top, Lurie's going to be involved and wants to know what the plan is moving forward. I think that one way or another, Rich, it's safe to say there are going to be massive changes in Philadelphia. Whether or not that involves Nick Sirianni, Jeffrey Lurie is going to have a big voice in that, and they're talking about that today.
All right, Tom. Thanks for the 2 cents, sir. I'll see you on game day morning tomorrow, and as always, appreciate it here.
Thanks, Rich.
You got it. That's Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.